Morning, everybody. Hope you're having a good start to your week on Monday, March 1st. If you haven't already checked the agenda today in Google Classroom, I suggest checking Aspen for your grades on DNA Week 16, Sheet 16, and Check 16 put together. I'm getting a lot of questions about revising Check 16. The first two questions on the check didn't go as well as I had hoped, so that may have contributed to a lower score. If you're interested in revising, if you check under classwork, under references, there's a video on how to revise sheet and the check, one or the other or both, whatever one you're interested in doing. Okay? Obviously, I'll reply back to emails if you're interested in revising. I'm going to go through the IXL I posted last week about what causes seasons on the Earth, which might help some people in the revising of DNA Check 16. And then I do kind of want to add on just a little bit of news, and that being mostly of kind of what's available as a COVID-19 vaccination, because the hope is we're kind of rounding the corner on the pandemic. That's the hope. Infection rates are dropping. Not significantly, but enough to the point where we can maybe start seeing some things in our life change. A lot of that has to do with behavior, just keeping social distancing, wearing masks, but also with vaccinations rising. And we just had the third vaccine voted for approval in the United States. So we'll talk about that again one more time, and we'll end the stream. I know there's been more news and more information about space, but we'll do that during the week. Save that for the week. Okay? So, good old IXL. Last week I assigned seasons, reasons for the seasons. And so I'm going to go through these two sections, see where we might have made some mistakes, because this would have helped you as a review for the last week. Earth is in constant motion. It rotates once every 24 hours, which causes day and night. Remember, night is basically the Earth's own shadow. Half the Earth is blocking light to the other half. Earth also orbits the Sun once every year, 365 and a quarter days, 12 months. During Earth's orbit, different parts of Earth experience different seasons. For example, the model below shows Earth at a point in its orbit when it is winter in the northern hemisphere and summer in the southern hemisphere. So label that model. So first of all, I know the top part is going to be the North Pole and the bottom part is the South Pole. Pretty obvious. What divides North and South in equal parts in distance would be the equator. So now I'm just left with the hemisphere. Hemisphere, half a sphere. So this top half between the equator and the North Pole, that would be the northern hemisphere. And then the bottom half between the equator and the South Pole, southern hemisphere. And so they're just checking to make sure that you know your geography, because it's going to be the tilting of those poles and separated by the equator that's going to give you seasons. The sun gives off light, which is a form of energy. A constant amount of sunlight travels away from the sun at all times. So the sun isn't increasing and decreasing in its radiation. It's always the same amount. The sunlight travels in straight lines in all directions. It appears parallel for us because the sun is so much larger than the Earth. This is not to scale, even though it is an accurate representation of an orbit, of a revolution of the Earth around the sun, moving in a counterclockwise direction. The model below shows the shape of Earth's orbit around the sun. Earth is shown at one point in its orbit during the month of December. So we're looking at December here, that being the North Pole, mostly Greenland at that part. Complete the sentence. The total amount of sunlight that approaches Earth is about the same. So we always have the same amount of light in June as in December. The amount is the same. It's the angle. It's going to be different. The distance between Earth and the Sun varies about 147 million kilometers and 152 million kilometers. This means that Earth's orbit is not perfectly circular. It's slightly oval, elliptical. The small change in distance between Earth and the Sun has little effect on the total amount of sunlight that approaches Earth. In fact, when Earth is close to the Sun, it is winter in the northern hemisphere. We know that day is January 5th when we're doing the Reason for Seasons document. Total amount of sunlight approaching Earth is nearly constant throughout the year, but because Earth is round, sunlight strikes different parts of Earth at different angles. The angle at which sunlight strikes Earth's surface determines how intense the light is. Remember, so now we're talking about direct and indirect light. In the model below, the yellow arrow represents sunlight approaching and striking Earth. The sunlight is most intense where it strikes Earth directly at a 90-degree angle, so the head-on of the arrow. And if the side of the arrow touches the Earth, then it's going to be indirect, right? We've discussed that in diagramming the Earth and the sunlight. This point is labeled below. Locations on Earth that are near this point experience sunlight of greater intensity than locations that are farther away. At which of the following locations does light strike Earth with the greatest intensity? Well, it's going to be at the equator, because it's taking up less space. Same amount of energy in the smaller space means more power. Incoming sunlight is most intense when it strikes Earth directly at a 90-degree angle. In the first model below, the yellow arrows represent some of the sunlight that strikes Earth near the equator. The circled section represents the area of Earth's surface that this sunlight reaches. The second model uses arrows to show the same amount of sunlight striking Earth near the North Pole. Notice that in this model, the sunlight spreads over a much larger area of Earth's surface than the sunlight striking near the equator does. As a result, this part of Earth receives sunlight that is much less intense. So, same energy. Each beam of light, each photon has the same amount of energy, but if it lands over a smaller area, it's higher in concentration, more power. Over a large area, it's more spread out, it's more diffuse, it has less power. Okay? Correct the statement. Compared to the sunlight that strikes Earth near the equator, the sunlight that strikes near the North Pole spreads out over a larger area, not smaller. This difference causes sunlight that reaches the North Pole to be less intense, that's true, than the sunlight that reaches the equator. Sure, Slicks, sure. When sunlight reaches Earth's surface, the surface absorbs some of the energy and heats up. The more intense the sunlight is, the more energy there is to absorb. The three models below show the same amount of sunlight striking different parts of the Earth's surface at different angles. So we have indirect, a little more indirect, and then in the middle we have direct. Select the model that shows part of the Earth's surface that would heat up the least. So which one's getting the least amount of power? So which is showing Earth having light that's spreading over the larger space, the larger area? It'd be that one. Earth's surface heats up when it absorbs energy from sunlight. The more intense the sunlight is, the more energy there is to absorb. The model below shows Earth at one point in its orbit around the sun. The yellow arrows represent sunlight approaching and striking Earth. So now we're showing the Earth's tilt. Geographically, the Earth is slanted, tilted in its axis, whereas day and night still are perfectly vertical. Correct the statement. At this point in Earth's orbit, the northern hemisphere is receiving more energy. That looks like it's mostly indirect, so I'm going to say the southern hemisphere is getting direct light right now, right underneath the equator. So the northern hemisphere is heating up more? No, the southern hemisphere is. Southern hemisphere is in summer. Each hemisphere experiences a different amount of heating depending on the season. When a hemisphere experiences summer, it receives more energy from the sun than it does in the winter. So the average temperatures in the summer months are usually warmer in the winter months, irregardless of hemisphere. Look at the model showing Earth at one point around the sun. Same picture. Use the model to complete the sentence. At this point in the Earth's orbit, the blank is in winter. Well, the top half's in winter because most of it's in nighttime. And it's getting indirect light, so northern hemisphere is in winter, and the southern hemisphere is in summer. Part 2. Earth is tilted on its axis. Because Earth is tilted, different parts of Earth receive different amounts of energy from the sun. As Earth orbits the sun over the course of a year, there is a dramatic change in the amount of energy that each hemisphere receives. The model below shows Earth's orbit around the sun. Earth is shown at a point when the northern hemisphere is in summer. Notice at the point, the North Pole is tilted toward the sun. So here's the tilt of the Earth, northern hemisphere tilted at the sun, southern hemisphere on the opposite side, therefore has to be tilted away. Select the image that shows how light strikes Earth at the point shown in the model. Well, which one is going to show the axis tilted to the right? It's this one. Oh, if I click and drag, just click it, submit. The model below shows Earth at 4 points in its orbit around the sun. The white lines of the North Pole and South Pole represent the Earth's axis. Based on the model, which of the following is true? Earth's axis tilted during only half of its orbit. The tilt of the axis stays the same throughout the year. North Pole always points towards the sun. Well, the North Pole does not always point towards the sun. Pointed away here. The tilt of the Earth's axis stays the same throughout the year. Yeah, it's staying to that right side tilt at 23.5 degrees. So that's pretty much accurate. Earth's axis tilted during only half of its orbit. Well, then that would mean the rest would have to be upright. Now, while this axis isn't really involved in the seasons, which we discussed in class, it's still tilted. The tilt still exists. So I'm going to say the tilt stays the same. Same direction, same angle. The model below shows Earth's orbit around the Sun. You got A, you got B. This is just the other picture. Now we're at B, the other side. Select the image that shows how Earth's axis tilts at point A. Well, the axis doesn't change, so just do whatever matches B, and then you'll have the correct angle. Solstices, everybody's favorite. The model below shows Earth at 2 points in its orbit. Each of these points is a solstice. A solstice is a day when one hemisphere receives the most energy it will receive all year. At the same time, the other hemisphere receives the least amount of energy it will receive all year, due to length of day and then also the angle of light. There are 2 solstices each year, one in June and one in December. In the northern hemisphere, the June solstice marks the first day of summer, and the December solstice marks the first day of winter. Regardless, well, yeah, okay, yeah, in the northern hemisphere. I was going to say regardless of the hemisphere. Summer is going to be receiving the most amount of energy. In the model, the close-up images show how sunlight strikes Earth on each solstice. Label the model. So which one's the December, which one's the June solstice? And I'm assuming we're doing this for the northern hemisphere, because we're kind of pointed at the northern hemisphere. So we're tilted away from the sun here in B. We're tilted towards the sun. So I'm going to go with this is the June solstice, summer in the northern hemisphere, and this is the start of winter in the northern hemisphere. Halfway between June and December solstices are the equinoxes. An equinox is a day when both hemispheres receive the same amount of energy. There are 2 equinoxes each year, one in March, one in September. In the northern hemisphere, the March equinox marks the first day of spring, or the vernal equinox. And the September equinox, the autumnal equinox, marks the first day of fall. Earth's locations during the 2 equinoxes and 2 solstices are shown below. Label the model. Equinoxes. Well, if we're going from winter to summer, counterclockwise, we're going to go from spring, March. And if we're going from summer to winter, I know we're going to go through fall. Almost done. The model below shows Earth at 4 points in its orbit around the Sun. Each point represents either a solstice or an equinox. Look at the model, then follow the instructions below. So I already see an A and a B. Correct the statements. As Earth moves from the equinox, labeled A, to the solstice, labeled B, the amount of energy reaching the northern hemisphere decreases. Days are getting shorter, and angles getting more indirect. On average, the northern hemisphere heats up less with each passing day. This period of time in the northern hemisphere is known as fall or autumn. Only those 2 options. Winter are going to be thrown in there. During the same time, the amount of energy reaching the southern hemisphere increases. Yes, because they're going to summer. On average, the southern hemisphere heats up more with each passing day. This period of time in the southern hemisphere is known as spring. Eventually, and then we'll go to B, summer. This model shows the Earth at the equinoxes and solstices. Match each cause with its effect. Ooh. Effect. When it is winter in the northern hemisphere, it is summer in the southern hemisphere. So when it's winter in the north, it's summer in the south. Well, that's because of the tilt of the axis, tilting in or away from the sun. Locations near the North Pole and South Pole get less energy than locations near the equator. Because the Earth is curved, some of that light is going to land on the Earth indirectly and not head-on. Congratulations, we mastered the skill. So that was last week's IXL that I signed. This is kind of supposed to be a review for seasons after vacation, and now we can maybe use this to help us revise for DNA Check 16. So what I just wanted to talk quickly about, again, we know that we're affected by COVID-19. We don't really need to go into the details of that, but maybe something that's a little more hopeful. That being vaccinations. The rates of the vaccines across the United States and who's getting vaccinated varies, but most states are starting to progress into their next tier of people. They're going past healthcare, they've already done that first, and first responders. They moved into the older tier, the oldest tier, probably 75 and up. And now most states are moving to 60s or 50s and offering other vaccines to other people with other conditions. So it's progressing well. Could it go faster? Absolutely. And so currently right now there are 2 vaccines produced by BioNTech in Germany, Moderna in Boston, and now the third one, Johnson & Johnson. Mr. G, I thought Pfizer was making a vaccine that was with Moderna recently. That is true. The BioNTech vaccine is being produced and distributed by Pfizer. So for a long time, it was pretty much only these 2 that were putting out vaccines. And so I think the end of last week, we had Johnson & Johnson finally receive approval from the FDA. Couple differences about these vaccines. Moderna and Pfizer, or BioNTech, they use something called mRNA as the basis for their vaccine. I'll come back to that point in a couple minutes. All right. Johnson & Johnson uses I believe a viral vector. I have to do a little more reading on them. Some kind of vector delivery. I can't remember if they use the basis for AstraZeneca or who uses a chimpanzee coronavirus to deliver the parts of the coronavirus to your cells, or if they were using a weakened form of the virus. So very similar to the flu vaccine currently is Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. Pfizer, Moderna, they were at about each, depends on who you ask, 95% efficacy. So that means that you would have a 95% chance of gaining immunity. Not that you are 95% immune, just that you have a 95% of being immune, which is incredible considering, the flu vaccine right now sits in the 60s and that you have other vaccines that sit in the 70s. Our MMR sits in the 90s, so this is fantastic news. Johnson & Johnson, I believe the last numbers I saw, sat somewhere around 80, between 70 and 80% efficacy. All right. So what's the benefit here? Why would I want to take a vaccine that's 80% chance of giving me immunity to a vaccine that's 95% chance of giving me immunity? Well, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine only needs 1 dose at normal temperatures. So it's very easy to store and deliver. Whereas Moderna and Pfizer, they both need 2 doses at very cold temperatures. Because of the nature of what their vaccine is, it's based on mRNA. What is mRNA? Well, picture DNA in the nucleus of your cells. DNA is the blueprint of how proteins and how genes are regulated in your body for all cells. Okay, some cells have certain parts of your DNA on, some cells have certain parts of your DNA off. Some cells are making certain proteins, some cells are doing other proteins. And so their function's based on the DNA and what the code is in all your cells for the entire DNA, your entire genomic code. Okay? You don't want that to change, because if you start changing the DNA, making little mistakes, you can get mutations. Mutations, unintended changes to function, protein, regulation, so on and so forth. Now, to keep the DNA protected, It stays inside the nucleus, inside the nuclear envelope, and instead your cells make disposable copies of the DNA. They call it RNA. It uses a different nucleic acid, and it's single-stranded for most of the time. So this disposable copy is made from the DNA and then sent outside the nucleus, where it's then used in your cells. The ribosomes come around, they pick up mRNA, which is one type of RNA, and they will then read it in series of 3 letters, 3 bases at a time, and provide amino acids, link them together to make a protein. Okay? With that, what have Pfizer and Moderna done is they took the spike protein of the coronavirus. The spike protein is what's on the outside. You ever see a picture of the coronavirus, you see the little spiky appearance of it. It's where it gets the name corona from, crown in Latin. Okay? So what they've done is they took the protein from the coronavirus, any major coronavirus, and I'll get into variants in a second, and then they sequenced the amino acids and the structure that go into the spike protein. And what they found is they reverse engineered it and made an mRNA code. Now, DNA RNA is universal. The DNA RNA that make up the instructions to make the spike protein is the same instructions that make your hair and nails, that make your fibers of your muscles, that make your whole body. Okay? So it's the same code. So what they've done is they've made this mRNA message. They put it on a little fat molecule, and then they inject it. And so this little molecule then delivers the mRNA to your cells, and then your cells make the virus's spike protein. But there's no virus to go along with it. It's just the outer coating of the coronavirus. And so now your immune cells pick up that spike protein and they're like, hey, this isn't from us. And so they recognize it as a foreign piece, and then they build something called antibodies in response to them. And those antibodies bond spike proteins, and the spike proteins can't bind to your cells. And then in the future, if you ever got the virus, no virus could get into your cell because the antibodies are now clamping down on the spike protein, preventing it from getting in, like a key going into a door. Your immune system's like, nope, key don't work. Okay? So, what's so special about this is, one, it doesn't require any virus. There's no virus. It doesn't require any other cells. The only thing there is a universal code that all cells know, and it basically reverse engineers and builds the enemy's weapon so that your body knows what it is. Its most powerful weapon, getting into your cells, the key. It stops the key from working. Now, these variants that are popping up, New York, California, South Africa, the UK, more infectious, more dangerous, so on and so forth. Why is it so cool that these companies used mRNA? Like I said, mRNA is universal, and it's a code. So if a virus decides to mutate its spike protein and change, Moderna and Pfizer or BioNTech, all they have to do is change the code, update their vaccine, and ship it. And they're ready to go with a different dose, a different vaccine. And that's what Moderna is actually doing right now in response to the South Africa variant. South Africa, I don't want to say strain, but the South Africa variant, because it's a slightly more deadly, is they're looking at two basic ways of addressing this variant. One, they're testing out to see if they can add a third dose to their vaccine currently and see if that's working. And the second way they're going to do testing against this variant is we're going to update the vaccine. In less than a month, they have a new vaccine ready to go. And they're going to test it and see how it responds to the variant. That's fantastic. That any vaccine can be updated like that. It's like downloading a patch to your computer, an update to your computer, to your favorite game, done for a vaccine. We have not had this before at all. It's a remarkable feat of medical engineering. And a lot of this technology came out from trying to research a way to make a vaccine for the HIV virus, which is incredibly tricky to pin down because it mutates so well. So they needed a vaccine that mutates and responds very well. So they made a vaccine based on mRNA. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, I believe, is not able to be updated as quickly as this. It's only 80% efficacy, but, however, it only takes one dose. So you can have more people become immune and therefore help get the United States closer to herd immunity and also the rest of the world. Okay, but the United States does make up about, like I saw, 20% of the world's infections, when it is not that in terms of population. So any step in the right direction is a good step in the right direction. Adverse reactions to the vaccine. Most of it has been pain, swelling at the injection site, pretty standard, inflammation. But people who provided the vaccine also monitor whoever receives the vaccine for 15 minutes to make sure those reactions don't happen, because they usually happen in those first 15 minutes. And they're incredibly, incredibly rare, as of right now. So I love the science behind the vaccines. Hopefully it provides us hope to getting back to normal. No questions? Alright, well, if you've been either some of my students, or you've been somebody just interested in hearing about seasons and then the vaccines, enjoyed having you. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching.